we're going to get started, and I want to thank you all and welcome to our 11th Sol Speaker Series. I can't believe we're coming up on 1 year. We've had some fantastic speakers, and I wanted just to let you know the bathrooms are down the hall and to the left. There's a drinking fountain on the right. And today, this is our first time having the speaker series in the middle of the afternoon in Eastern Standard Time, but in the evening in Great Britain area. And so I'm going to turn this over to Captain Pam Kingsley, my Deputy Director of Sciences, and she's going to be introducing our guests for tonight. So Pam, take it
Thank
away.
you, Fleet Captain. I am delighted to welcome Major Sam McEvoy to our meeting tonight. Sam, I just found out Sam is a member of the USS Merlin. I haven't asked him what his rank is, but I suspect it's lower than his real life rank. So, so Sam works at UK Space Command, and he will tell us a lot more about what he does there, protecting the Earth from space debris, looking at space weather, all sorts of other things. And he is very, very happy to take questions at the end. So if you have a question, keep hold of it until the end and you will get a chance to ask him. So, Sam, please take the floor.
Cool. No, thanks ever so much. Yeah, thanks for the very warm introduction and great to see so many people have dialed in to hear me sort of whistled on. Delighted to be the first side of this side of the pond to have a chance to talk to you about all this stuff. The Soul series looks amazing. I'm delighted to be here. I'm going to take you through a bit of what I call protecting the final frontier and the role of UK Space Command. So, as has just been said, I work at UK Space Command. I'm a major in the army, and I'm the military assistant to the commander there. So I'll take you through a little bit about what that involves. I do see there was a member about wearing a uniform. I clearly got the wrong end of the stick on that one, and I've worn my day uniform as opposed to my other one. But hey, I'll take you through some of this now. So some things that we're going to have a look at during this time. What is space? I'm going to touch on that one. I know there's quite a few science geeks in this group, which is wonderful to see. So I won't labour too much and hopefully won't insult anyone's intelligence too much on that one. But I'm going to take us through why it matters as well. And I think this is the piece where I think there's a slight disconnect. Exactly how reliant we are on space and why it matters so much to from a national perspective, from an economic perspective, a social perspective, and also clear a defence perspective as well, which is where I really will focus in on. And then what UK Space Command does to assure access to space and the data that space can provide us, which is crucial to our way of life. Right, so who am I? Why am I talking to you tonight? What's my background? So, as I said, I'm currently the MA to the commander, so the military assistant. So my job is to make sure that the commander is looked after quite a large extent, and that can range from quite a few ranges from making tea, make sure he's being content where he is, but also making sure he's prepared for meetings, knows what's going on, understanding the background behind everything and providing context for him. So a chance to learn quite a lot from him. Weirdly enough, I am not a huge scientist by trade. My degree is in classics and philosophy, which I studied at Durham University, had a wonderful time there, and learning how to think about things a slightly different way, perhaps, than your traditional science backgrounds. I joined the Army in 2009 into the Royal Corps of Signals, which is part of the British Army that focuses on communications, so signals, and I ended up looking at or commanding a SATCOM troop as my first troop. So a troop that would go out and provide satellite communication links, from a deployed HQ back to the UK or really everywhere in the world. And that was my first sort of touch into space, even though I hadn't really appreciated it at the time. It's very easy to go out, set up your terminal, the magic of science happens, and you're talking to someone on the other side of the world. And from there, I started getting into like, oh, hang on. So what's actually happening when we turn this on and do that button? What's that? I've had a wonderful time in the Army so far. I've been in for about 15 years now, and I've done troop command at high readiness, so held at 48 hours notice to move to head anywhere in the world. I was an instructor at the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst, so that was training new British Army officers. I commanded a NATO subunit operation, so took my troop out at the time to Afghanistan and commanded them there, while having a subsequent deployment to Turkey. And perhaps my definite highlight, commanding establishing 242 Gurkha Signal Squadron. For those who don't know, Gurkhas, soldiers from Nepal who agreed to serve in the British Army. a wonderful, wonderful group of soldiers who are absolutely fantastic. Will work, like absolutely anything, and that was probably my highlight. And that was commanding about 103 soldiers and officers. Claims to fame: I commanded 5 troops and 2 subunits. I'm very, very happy with that one. I deployed the first use of AI into an operational theatre and deployed a quantum computer for the first time on an exercise. So I've managed to become quite a geek despite my philosophical background. I'd be delighted to talk about that at the end if people are interested as well. And clearly, I picked some pictures from around my career. There is a law that if you're in the army, you have to get a picture of your troop around a fire. So that's was included in there as well. Current role, I look after the commander. A good publicity photo in front of the UK Space Command patch there. But what is an MA? Because it's not always easy to see. So if you're a Blackadder fan, there's a picture of Captain Darling, which is not the most flattering thing, but it's probably not a million miles away from the truth if I'm interested. Bring it back to Trek a little bit more. So I see Captain Benteen from Deep Space Nine. She's introduced as Admiral Layton's adjutant. She follows him around, make sure he's got prepped and all that sort of good stuff. I suddenly realised when I brought it up, not the best example because Admiral Layton is clearly evil, which seems to be a bit of a prerequisite to be a Starfleet admiral. So not the best example. And so the one I finally settled on was probably Raffi from Picard. She seems to be introduced in that as his first officer. I do disagree with that one. I think she's his MA. One, because we're similar ranks in that one, so she seems to be at the right stage of her career for it. But also, there's still bits in this scene where she says, "Oh well, yes, this came up, but then you introduce it with this. You brought up this piece, So she's prepped him. She's got the messages across. That seems to be about where it is. So looking good on that one. Best bit though, I get to have this. No, I'm from Salisbury. I only work in outer space is a good claim to fame that I get to say. So what is space then? So as Q quite happily introduced us to, it's not safe out there. It's wondrous. There's some amazing things out there, but it's also quite a dangerous and hostile environment. Some definitions then. If you go to the Encyclopedia Britannica, space is a boundless three-dimensional extent in which objects and events occur and have relative position and direction, which is very, very clear and no need to expand on that any further. But if we were to wish to, space is to as existence is to time. Okay, it is big as eternity is to time. To break it down a little bit more, for Douglas Adams, space is big. You won't believe how vastly, hugely, mind-bogglingly big it is. You may think it's a long way down the road to the drugstore, but that's just peanuts to space, right? It is a very, very big AO. NASA breaks it down and gets it a little bit closer to home, the region beyond Earth's atmosphere, and we're starting to get something a bit more useful. Clearly, NASA also decide that space is the final frontier. So if you look on the NASA's website, that's where it does describe it as. And JFK really starts to hit the nail on the head when you get to 1966 and you start to look at the space race. The exploration of space will go ahead whether we join it or not. It's one of the great adventures of all time, and no nation would expect to be the leader of other nations and expect to stay behind in the race for space. He's really hitting on something here because space is just so fundamental to nations and their ability to prosper that if you're not involved in space, you're behind. And Krista McAuliffe, I think everyone should hopefully recognise, who died on the Challenger shuttle disaster, really believed that space is for everybody, and that's true as well. So while it's important for nations, it's important for individuals as well. So where Space Command operates, so space really begins 100 kilometres above mean sea level. We say 100 kilometres, that's known as the Kármán line. That's because that's the area at which aerodynamic flight becomes impossible once you start to go above that level. So that's where the atmosphere has disappeared and you're no longer at the whim of aerodynamic forces. You're outside of the atmosphere at that point. The atmosphere does flex. It can get bigger and smaller depending on solar activity and things like that as well. So the lowest satellites tend to be around 150 kilometres above mean sea level, and they're in the low Earth orbit. It's a high vacuum, not a perfect vacuum because there is stuff in it. There's effects of dust, radiation, that sort of thing, but effectively a vacuum to all intents and purposes. And when we say that, there's also debris. There's a lot of things flying around. I think the smallest thing that we're really tracking is a screw. There's things like, baseball-sized objects flying there, flecks of paint, but there's also, micrometeorites, all those sort of things as well. lots of radiation and lots of temperature variations. So when we talk about building satellites, it gets quite complicated because the side of a satellite facing the sun could be plus 200 degrees C. The side of a satellite facing away, it could be minus 200 degrees C. So a 400 degrees C temperature variation on the same object as it totals around the planet. So it's quite a fascinating place that it can be as well. And here you can see some of the impacts that the debris can have. You can see left side of either a radiator or a solar panel. And on the right-hand side there, you can see it when a piece of debris has impacted into it. And because force equals mass times acceleration, you can have a very, very small object that is moving incredibly fast. And that's the acceleration piece, bringing up the amount of force that's exerted. So something very small can have a very big impact. Things are traveling around the planet at about 8 kilometers a second easily. It's not a geographic domain either, because geo obviously refers to the Earth. So when we talk about it, it's an astrographic domain. It is something that is a domain out among the stars. There are various areas that we're interested in. LEO is low Earth orbit. That's very good for things like Earth observation. Medium Earth orbit, very good for things like position navigation and timing. And geostationary orbit, really good for communications. You've got satellites that can move between those various areas as well. You've also got things that are even beyond a geostationary orbit. So geostationary orbit is really useful because that is the distance at which things go around the planet at 23 hours, 56 minutes per day, which is exactly the same time speed that the Earth is rotating. So you can put something in geo, it will just stay in the same location above you on the surface of the planet. So very, very valuable sort of part of the world there, or part of the astrographic domain there. The 4 C's of space, though, it is critical. It's absolutely critical to modern day life, the prosperity of the economy, and the operational advantage enjoyed by defence, but also the nations. The moment that we lose access to space, I will touch on this a little bit later, we will know about it very, very quickly. It is critical to modern day life. It's competed. People want access to space. Commercial entities want access to space just as much as nations want access to space. Individual companies want access to space. And there's only so much, if you pardon the pun, space out there. There are only so many orbital profiles, and the more satellites you dump up there, the more it gets there. So it's congested as well. And it is contested as well. That can be kinetic action, non-kinetic action. When I say kinetic, something hitting into something else. Say non-kinetic, a soft power, so electronic warfare activity. Stuff happens in space, but it is a contested environment, and as I said, congested. It is getting busier, both in terms of the amount of satellites that are in orbit around it, but also with the amount of debris that becomes in orbit around it as well. So space as a region then, so we've done our sort of map, moving on to the weather in it. There is a fair amount of space weather out there. There's Van Allen belts, which are big belts of radiation that go around the world, coronal mass ejections, solar flares, and cosmic rays, which are some of the things I'm just going to touch on now. So I'll start with a coronal mass ejection, which is an incredible sort of phenomenon, really. It's highly magnetized plasma. So it's part of the sun throwing off its surface. And when that happens, you have hours to days of notice as it moves towards the Earth. It could be blasted away in the other direction to the Earth, but we don't really mind about that so much. We're really concerned about the stuff that's going to impact us on the planet. And these are extremely powerful things. They range in intensity, so some can be quite low level, some can be incredibly powerful things. What it does, so if we were to hit by a level 5 coronal mass ejection, which is the sort of the highest one you can get, or sort of above that threshold, you're talking about the ionosphere thickening, communications being disrupted, huge amounts of radiation in orbit, and terror levels of power into the atmosphere. So the big example of this is something called the Carrington event that happened in the 19th century. A pretty powerful coronal mass ejection impacted onto the Earth, and you can have the aurora being seen as low south as pretty much the equator. That amount of radiation being hurled into the planet just created a huge amount of charging the atmosphere. There's talk of light bulbs that couldn't be turned off. There were 2 telegraph operators who disconnected their telegraphs from the mains, from the batteries, were still able to communicate between because of the amount of power that was just flowing through the atmosphere. So when we talk about that in the 1890s, when the current event sort of happened, that's very interesting. It's like, oh wow, that's a fascinating thing. But the world has changed quite a lot since then. We're now at a point where there's tons of satellites in orbit. These things are going to be impacted by that sort of event, and how we would mitigate against that is something we need to be very much aware of and thinking about. We need to be able to track where these are happening so that we can prepare ourselves for it. Probably something that happened in 1972 was another coronal mass ejection that impacted the planet. So we had satellites at this point to be able to use them. The Australian Army reported they lost access to high frequency radio communications, which are used for long distance communications. Nuclear detonation detection satellite detected an explosion. Okay, there wasn't one, but the amount of energy they detected, they thought there had been something. And there's reports of magnetic influence sea mines detonating spontaneously. So it can have an impact. What you can see on the screen now is an image of a transformer along the western coast of the US that melted as a result of that amount of energy being pumped into it as well. So this is something that has quite a large impact on the Earth. And it's something that could happen at any point. There's not much we can do about it, control it. Fortunately, we have something called the magnetosphere. And magnetosphere is part of the Earth's magnetic field, and it routinely protects us from solar weather and solar radiation. And it's effectively our version of shields. I hope you can see a little image on the screen now. The broadband is holding up, but you can see what's happening. There's the Earth's magnetic field when it's quite a large object in front of you. And as the mass ejection hits, you can see it become compressed down as this amount of energy just smashes into it. What tends to happen there is some of the energy can be funneled back along the magnetosphere and onto the planet itself. But you can see the magnetic field protecting us to quite a large extent. Various levels protect us better than others. There's some that's easier to deal with, but that's something that can impact us. So what happens? Coronal mass ejection hits, you lose SATCOM, we can assume. So there's no initial recce. So any object forces that are out on the ground, deployed on the other side of the world, who use SATCOM as their primary means back, they want to be able to produce those information reports back. Extremely high frequency communications probably recover quite quickly, but the satellite must have survived in order to do that. No GPS, so guided missiles, UAV, Apache, fixed frequency hopping for radios, and crypto sync. Those are a lot of acronyms that I've just dumped in there, but GPS, global positioning system. They use guided missiles, smart munitions, use GPS in order to be able to find their targets. They're not being used anymore. UAV, unmanned aerial vehicles, they require access to GPS in order to function. Apache or helicopters, aircraft, all that sort of thing, are no longer going to have access to that as well. Fixed frequency hopping is part of our something we use on our radios, so we jump between multiple frequencies quite quickly in order to avoid enemy detection. They require timing signals in order to be able to synchronize when they change frequencies between the radios, so we don't have that anymore. You're looking at short range comms because your high frequency radio frequencies are affected because they tend to use the ionosphere, which has just been compressed. So as that happens, you're no longer able to have your long range comms. So you're operating about 25 kilometers because you can't use your cryptographic equipment anymore because that requires timing. You're operating in clear, so you're no longer on secret comms either. So suddenly you can see this coronal mass ejection hits, our way of operating as a military changes quite significantly. And that's an artist's impression of what World War III will therefore look like if that happens. We're no longer using our smart munitions. We require ourselves to build cannons out of what we can find lying around on the ground. We also have solar flares, though. Solar flares are slightly more common. They're electromagnetic energy. No matter is involved in them. They tend to have a greater risk to things in orbit than it does to humans on the ground. So satellites, what we tend to worry about far more than anything else. The ionosphere, which again we use for our long-range comms for radio, will also be impacted by that. So that can be impacted. And astronauts in orbit also clearly need to be concerned about it. Perhaps not so much a threat as a CME, but still something we need to be aware of and something that we're tracking. If you're a Dominion shipyard, clearly that creates a huge problem, as we've seen that happen before, although Voyager never seemed to mind so much about it and flew through solar flares fairly routinely every episode. Why do we get solar flares? So the sun goes through a solar cycle. It will go into something called solar minima, where it's very, very calm, and it's also to do with its magnetic field realigning. So as it does that, the sun will effectively just its magnetic fields get stretched. They will snap back to where they're meant to be. They realign. Solar minima, they've just realigned, and everything's nice and calm. Solar maxima, they're at breaking point, and therefore the sun's really, really active, throwing off CMEs, solar flares, all that sort of good stuff. That's not to say it's a hard and fast rule, though. You can get solar phenomena at any time, but it is more likely at solar maxima, where the sun is at its most active. We're looking at the sun being in solar maxima pretty much now, November 2024 to March 2026. It seems to be pretty much there, if I'm honest. So if you're in the UK a couple of months ago, you might have been lucky enough. I think it was happening pretty much all over the world. They're lucky enough to see the aurora fairly well south. That's a good impact of a bit of solar maxima that's going on. What we do find, though, it might be very easy to think, well, solar minima, fantastic. We like that, nice and calm, nice sort of the summer. You're not in the bad weather season of the solar system. But it does seem that solar maxima protects us quite happily from cosmic rays as well, which is stuff that has happened from outside of our solar system, sometimes outside the galaxy. What are cosmic rays then? They're high energy radiation originating from outside of our solar system. Solar maxima clearly protects us a little bit more from them. They tend to impact electronics fairly significantly. This is getting slightly hypothetical and more outside of the region of what space can be interested in. We're interested in pretty much up to the moon, not much further away from that. But Voyager seems to have had a couple of impacts from cosmic rays impacting it, which has flipped binary bits within its operating system. So they think that's what's happened and causing some of the problems that's happening. It can impact people as well. So Neil Armstrong and the crew of Apollo 11, a lot of the crews heading towards the moon, reported that they could, when they were trying to close their eyes, they could keep getting flashes in front of their eyes as they were moving around the capsule. These happened every couple of minutes and would also happen when they were trying to sleep. So closing your eyes didn't make any bit of difference. They were still getting these really bright flashes, and they weren't sure what it was. And what people now think it was cosmic rays passing through their retina and reacting, clearly passing through their bodies. But they only saw the flash when obviously it went through their eyes. These cosmic rays were therefore passing through them at any given moment that we could see. So only when it impacted their eyes, they saw the flash. Something to think about. So moving on to part two then. Why do we care about this? I've got a nice little Captain Janeway quote, because you've got to have a Captain Janeway quote. Space means nothing, but it's what connects all of our worlds. So why do we care about it? It's a fascinating thing. We can talk about space all the time. We routinely sit down and watch a TV show where people explore space. But what is it that it means so much to us right here and right now? From a very cynical perspective, it's about the money, economy, and prosperity. We are utterly reliant on space for everything that we do. So the average Brit wakes up in the morning, is using space straight away. You check your phone, you're lying in bed, check your phone in the morning. That's accessing space immediately. You use probably about 40 different satellites a day without even realizing it. And if we were to lose access to just the timing signal, so just the timing signal from a GPS or a navigation satellite system, suddenly it tells different pieces of equipment what time it is, and that's all. You'd be looking at the UK economy probably losing about £1 billion a day, which is not sustainable. You're looking at COVID level impact on the economy from that perspective. We're utterly reliant on economy and prosperity. From that, there's probably about 52,000 Brits working in the UK space sector. So therefore, that's 50,000 jobs that are utterly reliant on it. And the UK and the space economy is heading for the trillions within probably about 2030. So if you want to get a good economy, you've got to be involved in space. It's as simple as that. This is a very much, show me the dollar signs / pound symbols. Space is where it's at. From a security and defense perspective, it provides significant advantage. If you have control of space, you have control of the air, and therefore you get land and maritime freedom of maneuver. Space is the ultimate high ground. If you are sat there and you can move around the entire planet, persistence of vision. It provides that find and understand function quite happily. It provides the command and control of your forces who are using the satellite communications and links. It provides the ability to provide crypto and secure communication systems. Space is vital to all of that, and how we fight and operate would be completely different if we didn't know anything about, if we didn't have access to space. It gives us global sense, global decision advantage. It enables all of our activity. And crucially, what it allows us to do is something called the OODA loop: observe, orientate, decide, and act. That's how you make decisions. So you observe what's going on, you orientate yourself to what's happening, what it means to you, you decide what you're going to do, and you act. If you have access to space, you can do that faster than your adversary, which means you have the initiative and you have decision advantage. If you are traveling around that OODA loop faster than the enemy is, you have a decisive advantage. And that's why we are so excited about space. It enables that entire system to move at speed and efficiency. And therefore, we are very interested in keeping access to it. As a warfighting domain, it is the ultimate high ground because nobody owns it either. There are multiple laws and consensus that says everyone has access to space. There was an initiative quite early on by the country along the equator to say, no, we have access to space, or we own access to space above the equator, above our nations. They wanted access. They wanted that because that's where the geo belt is, and therefore they were very excited to have access to that. But there's an element of it's a very good analogy on the example that that's how airspace works. You own the airspace above your nation. You don't do that for space because it becomes slightly ludicrous. That goes on to infinity, and it stops people being able to access space pretty much at all, or effectively the really useful parts of it. So laws in space come about by consensus. Everyone basically has to agree that that's what they want. So clearly we decided, no, we don't like that thing about nations owning the part of space above them. Space is open to all. The Moon Treaty did not work. That was something where people said, well, if space belongs to everyone, then stuff that we bring back from space should belong to everyone as well. And the US, I think, quite rightly said, no, if we're going to space, we're bringing stuff back. We built the rocket, we funded it, we own it at that point. That's very, very fair. And the Artemis Accords that you might have been seeing appear in the news really sort of solidify that. But again, that's been agreed by consensus. Things like the astronaut treaty, agreed by consensus. There's lots of things in there that a lot of nations have gone, yep, agree. Some have gone, no, that hasn't worked. Probably the most important one, no weapons can be stored in space, is a really sort of key one, especially from a defense perspective. It can be used for transit. So, for example, if there's a intercontinental ballistic missile, that is allowed to transit through space, but it cannot be stored there. And that's a really, really key thing. Perhaps one of the ever so slightly things as well, there is greater civilian reliance. And from a military perspective in a warfighting domain, civilians are always a factor for us, but space has a number of civilian things, perhaps more as a proportion than the military. In most sort of battlefields and war zones, the civilians have either been cleared out or have left. That is not the case for space. There are a number of civilian objects constantly moving through it. How do we mitigate against that? So from a military perspective, satellite communications are vital for us, as we've discussed. GPS, finding your way around, is really, really important. And clearly, as I spoke about the magnetosphere as well, that magnetosphere is a space-based thing. It enables you to use your map and compass. A CMA hits and breaks that magnetosphere. Your compass is no longer going to point north. So therefore, from a military perspective, even something as simple as your compass is really important. And I've got to get my joke in. I'd be lost without my compass. So therefore, I don't want that to happen. Smart munitions as well use GPS, the ability to find and locate themselves in 3 dimensions. And again, you don't have that. You don't have smart munitions. If you don't have smart munitions, suddenly you can no longer have that efficiency of the economy of munitions. The advantage of having a smart munition is that you can fire 1 missile as opposed to 3 or 4 to have the same effect on a target. That's 3 or 4 times more stockpiles. And certainly from a Geneva Conventions perspective, the ability to limit civilian casualties as well, have that ability to target more effectively is very, very important for us. Hedy Lamarr, who invented frequency hopping, and I've put that picture there because you can't really demonstrate fixed frequency hopping as a as a picture. But yeah, she invented fixed frequency hopping, the ability to encrypt your communications. Nuclear detonation is one as well, and information surveillance and reconnaissance that you can see there. Sorry, the ability to look down and see what's going on from orbit, and loiter over it as well to see what's going on. So, what space has to be assured? There is civilian dependency on space just as much as there is military. It's vital to military operations, and it is clearly in the UK, it's actually classed as part of our critical national infrastructure. So as much as power grid is vital to the UK way of life, space is as vital to the UK way of life as well. And I've put on the screen a picture of Starfleet security. Starfleet security, we all want to go out and explore the final frontier and see the wonderful things, but you've got to have the security people as well. You don't want to have to use them, but you've got to have that part of insurance, don't you? And that's what very much the way I see the part of the UK in this. We want to assure access to space. We're one of those things that you don't want to have to use, but we're ready to be there if we are. If you want to impact space, there's three things that you can look at: ground, link, and space. So the ground segment, your satellite terminals, all those things are on the ground. Your command and control, because you fly the satellites from the ground. If you destroyed a command and control hub, the satellite is no longer going to work for you. So that's where you can impact space. You also target the link, because there's a link between the ground and space itself. So you can target that link and block the signals from getting to the satellite, or stop the signals from the satellite from reaching down to the ground again. So that's a way to impact space from a military perspective, and clearly space itself as well. But it's not just about, when we talk about war in space, we're not just talking about satellites attacking other satellites or spacecraft impacting other spacecraft. We can also talk about operations on the ground to assure access to space and impacting the links as well. So what are the threats on orbit then from a military perspective? So anti-satellite, or ASAT. First one of these, I think, was launched in the 1970s. I'm going to say it was the US who sort of had that first one that they sort of did. Took an F-15 out, attached an anti-satellite missile to it, and fired up an anti-satellite missile and destroyed a satellite. In the 1970s, that was a little bit more, probably a little bit more easier to deconflict because there were fewer satellites about. So you might remember Russia did this a couple of years ago and destroyed one of their own satellites with an anti-satellite missile. What we found on that one was that that created so much debris that people in the astronauts in the ISS had to take cover, and that debris cloud is still up there, still orbiting the Earth. It's not going to hit anything. It's being tracked, but that's going to move into different orbital planes, and as it does so, it might start impacting things. So because there is now a lot more out in orbit, that creation of debris from an anti-satellite missile is something we really need to be concerned about. You can also have lasers. So lasers can be used to destroy. Can't really be used to destroy a satellite at this point, but what you can do is dazzle its sensors. So a laser shining up into a satellite camera means that satellite can't be used for its ISR function anymore. One of the things that is being used at the moment, this is all open source, something you can look up and read about, satellites that can grab another satellite and pull them out to a different orbital plane. So this is something that has been done. I've just spoken about debris. One of the things that's really important to factor in here as well is that is really useful. Space debris is becoming a really big problem. The ability to have a satellite go out, grab another satellite and move it when that satellite has stopped functioning and take it to a graveyard orbit where it's no longer in the way of something else is really useful. That's really important. But it can also be used as a weapon. And that's the thing that we really have to factor in here. Is what it's doing, is it benign? Is it something more malevolent? You have a conjunction as well. That's where something goes and hits something else. You can have kinetic kill vehicles that make advantage of this and just smash into other things. High-powered microwaves, chemical sprayers to disrupt things, and orbital nuclear detonation as well is something that's been in the news fairly recently as well. The potential of blowing up a nuke in orbit. But conjunction, you can see there, something smashing into a satellite. And that, again, could be accidental, but could it also be something that's been designed? Problems with kinetics, I've just sort of touched on it there. One of them is attribution. There's a lot of things moving around in space. Some of it can be, I've spoken about how we're tracking things like screws, baseballs, golf balls, very sort of small objects in space. Something can go smash into something else that we weren't tracking. There's a threshold here. Something can go damage it. The Kessler effect is something that's worth talking about. So I spoke earlier about how force equals mass times acceleration, that very small thing that's traveling at 8 kilometers a second. Well, that's the A in that equation being quite high. So a very small object traveling at that speed has a fair bit of force. If something goes and smashes into a satellite that then fragments and creates a lot more fragments that are then traveling at 8 kilometers a second as well, but in multiple new directions, like a shotgun blast heading out in a cone, well, that can create debris that can go smash into another satellite, which then breaks up, goes into another satellite that then breaks up. Suddenly you have this, exponentially growing field of debris that is causing huge hazards on orbit. So therefore, when we talk about responsible use of space, which is something the UK is very, very excited about, and making sure that we want to be a responsible user of space and want to encourage other people to be responsible users of space as well. That as a weapon of war, destroying a satellite with a kinetic thing so it breaks up, has huge impact beyond just impacting one satellite. So we're really excited, and I talk about it as a weapon of war. It's also just about making sure that people who have satellites in orbit are using them correctly and responsibly. You don't just put it up there. It's not a one-shot, one and done. Right, my satellite's out of fuel, I'm going to forget about it. That satellite is still moving around. What's your long-term plan for making sure this isn't going to be an impact on anyone else? How are you making sure that your satellite, in its routine course of operations, doesn't go and hit another satellite? We need to make sure that space is being used responsibly. And I think this is a wonderful quote between Joseph and Ben Sisko from season 7 of Deep Space Nine. I think you're always telling that space is big, it's endless and filled with infinite wonders. You think it'd be more than enough room to allow people to leave each other alone. Unfortunately, it doesn't quite work like that. Space is big, but there's only limited things out there, and we aren't inclined to leave each other alone, I think, unfortunately. So UK ambitions. We want to be a meaningful space player. What does that mean? We want to make sure that we can have an impact on space, but also we're using it responsibly, and we're setting an example for others how space should be used as well. Want to join the Launch Club? We had an attempt at this a few years ago. It didn't quite work. We tried a horizontal launch from an aircraft from Spaceport Cornwall. I think the best quote that came out of this: "Space is hard. It's very, very difficult to put things in orbit." But we're not deterred, and we're going back to give it another go as well. We want to do in the launch, going to have a vertical launch from Scotland, and still looking at Newquay as a horizontal launch capability. We want a sovereign capability. We want the ability for us to be able to put satellites in orbit and to rely on others to do it for us. And sovereign satellites as well. Clearly, the UK has its own satellites, one of our own military satellites as well. And we just launched our first one in August. Our first MOD ISR satellite is currently up there. That was taken from concept to design to actually built and now on orbit in about 3 years, which is a fantastic achievement for us. Out of that, we've got the UK Space Command, where I work, UK Space Agency, and the UK Space Academy is being set up as well. So a meaningful global leader in space, this is what we want out of it. Coherence and resilience, National Space Operations Centre, a multi-role, multi-spectral ISR, intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance, low Earth orbit satellite constellation, space control capabilities, enhanced space domain awareness, and global space-based communications, what we're trying to get out of UK Space Command. We cannot do it alone. Space Command is about 500 people, all told, probably about 100 in the command itself. But we want cross-government governance as well, and how we bring that together. We work with the UK Space Agency. We work with government organisations, and as part of the National Space Board that sits above that as well. So how we break into this is really important. But it is a cross-government thing. It is not just UK Space Command on its own. Our vision, operate, generate, collaborate, and educate. And I'm going to take us through each of this now. But to put it another way, we're not here to conquer. We're here to coexist and learn. We are here to assure access to space, but make sure we can keep assuring access to space. We're not the bullies. We're not going to be, space superiority or anything like that. We just want to make sure that we can look after ourselves there. We can enjoy the benefits that having access to space gives us. Clearly, we can't do any of it without people. People are really, really important to us. So it's run by a 2-star. We've got a command warrant officer, but it's a joint organisation. And when I say joint, That's made up of not just RAF, not just Army, not just Navy. It's all three services plus our civil service counterparts as well, who bring that wonderful sort of civilian flavour to it as well, and a different perspective, a different way of viewing things. It's a great thing to do. It's growing as well. We've got reservists in there. We've got international exchange people. We trained about 907 people to date on last count. And we are building a pan defence skills framework as well. We're growing space IQ, as we like to call it, across defence and across government as well. Letting people know why space matters so much. How we operate, we want command and control, space domain awareness. We protect and defend our assets there. We do ISR, intelligence, space reconnaissance, and Skynet, which is a terrible name, I know, but Skynet is our global satellite system. It came along before the Terminator films. I'll point that out via communications. We have the UK SPOC, or the National Space Operations Center, as it now is, but they seek to understand and exploit the space domain and defend our national interests. They are effectively looking up in the sky and finding out what's going on up there. No pictures allowed in the SPOC, but there's a good representation that you might recognise from film as well. But that's the sort of thing they get up to: strategic missile warning, theatre missile warning, space domain awareness, space control, and space support to operations as well. What does that look like? This sort of thing here. So you can see here what's going on around in orbit. Here's monitoring these satellites. What are they doing? Is there anything we need to be aware of? What's happening on orbit for us? Okay, this is not real. This is all mocked up. Just point out really clearly. And clearly, while there's satellite activity, there's also space support to operations and space weather alerts as well. What is the sun doing? What's happening on orbit from a sort of weather perspective? And we can produce these out for forces as well. The Met Office is a wonderful part. It's really, really good at space weather, actually. And if you are interested, you can have a look on the Met Office website, who also have a space weather page and will tell people what's going on, what the sun is up to. And we produce reports of this to let our forces know, right, okay, so there's going to be this activity here. This is going to have an impact for you. We generate as well. We build stuff. So I'm taking a moment to talk about Tyche. So Tyche was made by a company called Surrey Satellite Technologies Limited, so a UK company, designed, built there. And it was launched in August aboard a SpaceX rocket and put into orbit. And it's up there and working now. And as I say, for about 3 years from beginning of the concept to generate to put it up there, that's our first satellite that we put up there. Enormously proud of it. But yeah, this is us becoming a meaningful space player. And we collaborate as well. We're part of CSPO, the Combined Space Operations Initiative, so a US-led operation to improve interoperability among various nations. Obviously part of NATO, Operation Olympic Defender, which again is a US-led space operations initiative. We exchange and liaise personnel, have a national space operation and industry partners as well. Because again, we can't do this alone. Space is a team sport, and we have to work together in order to progress. See? And there's just a couple of images of the sort of people that we work with. But we are utterly aligned with our allies and partners. That's both from a military perspective, the various different space commands, the academic partners, industry partners. We all know that we have to work together in order to progress meaningfully in this domain. And as part of that as well, we're growing the Defence Space Academy as well. So this is currently being set up and produced. And the idea is that we will take people, give them a bit of an introduction to space, we'll make them an expert, and we'll get them to be up to a qualified space instructor. It's about a 2-year-long course. So I was lucky enough to, as I said, I commanded a SATCOM troop, got quite interested in space, did my foundation space operations course, went off and did my advanced space operations course, which is in about 2 weeks, but with a fair bit of reading and exams that are dumped in there as well. My classics and philosophy brain, trying to get my head around orbital mechanics was a bit of a struggle, but we got there in the end. But we're growing that space IQ because you don't have a choice but to understand space. I think it's something that's going to impact you whether you like it or not. So in order to operate and understand the modern world, you need to understand how space works as well. Again, people and culture is all behind this. Regular and reserve, the UK Space Agency is something we routinely link in with. but it's also about making sure that we are looking after our people as well. It is growing. We want loads. We want RAF, Army, Navy to get involved. We want people who can come in and go, are we doing sci-fi stuff today? Getting excited about it and be impacting it. You don't have to be a space ninja, as I've hopefully proven. We want people with commercial expertise. We want project managers, lawyers, policy advisors. We need people to our media and comms and engagement as well. It's a wonderful opportunity for people to get involved and if you are interested in space, find out what's going on with it. We need people to be involved in space and be interested in it and to advocate for it. It's very much a team sport, as I've said a couple of times now. What's it looking like in the future? Space access is getting easier and cheaper. Reusability. We've all seen I think the wonderful footage of SpaceX recently where they caught the rocket. That is proper sci-fi stuff there. How they've come up with that is absolutely incredible. But reusability is becoming a lot more common. So the ability to get things into orbit is becoming cheaper again. Space tourism is becoming a thing. Look back, 30 years, 40 years, who would have thought that would have been before, behind sort of sci-fi? That is something that's now becoming relatively commonplace. We're looking at in-space assembly, manufacture and repair. Why build a satellite on the ground when we could do it up in orbit? Why, when a satellite runs out of fuel, well, why don't we just repair it, refuel it in orbit? It's very complicated and difficult, but these are things we're developing now as well. Active debris removal, sort of touched on that, can be dual use, is a real big benefit. We want stuff to come in and grab debris and move it out of the way so that we can get new satellites up in there, but it can also be a weapon, and we just want to be careful and alive to that. More manned space stations. China has their manned space station up there that seems absolutely fantastic and doing really well. More are coming. I think we've all heard the Artemis missions heading back to the moon, and wonderfully, there to stay is the ambition. Elon Musk wants to go to Mars. He's going to have a manned space station in order to get there, but he wants to go to Mars and be there himself. Going beyond, back to the moon, cislunar, space-based solar power generation. Can we harness the power of the sun more effectively and use that? Mega constellations of satellites, huge constellations of satellites moving around the planet. And clearly, with that comes weapons as well. Soft and hard kill vehicles. Evolution of ballistic missiles. The world is not getting safer. I think it's fair to say. We've seen that throughout, but this is an interesting time. Final thought then, before we sort of move on to any questions. The next war may not be started in space. It's probably unlikely we're going to have like a Moonraker, Star Wars, Star Trek, space conflict situation. But it will probably be won or lost there, I would say. Those opening salvos may well start in space, they may not, but the ability to have access to space is going to decide who wins out on the other side. If one nation has access to space and another does not, I think that's a very one-sided fight that's going to be over very, very quickly. And that's why it's so important to us. So you're going to be like Captain Kirk. It's always good to ask a question, no matter what. I'd love to open up the floor to any questions or comments.
Does anybody have any questions? I'll kick us off with one. You said there were going to be launches from Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
Why Scotland? It's very far north. Why not Gibraltar?
It is very far north. There's one thing. So there's certain orbits that are really good to get into. Polar orbits you can get into them there quite easily. Polar is becoming a lot more interesting because there's various activities going on there. Melting ice caps, good thing. Sorry, not a good thing, but it's going to open up more things, and therefore the ability to have satellites in orbit over polar is therefore quite interesting and therefore quite useful. It's also quite far away from from populated areas, so therefore there's less impact if something goes wrong. So if something goes wrong, it's rocket body is not going to land on someone, so therefore it's quite safe from that perspective as well. There's a way to grow the economy as well. There's a way to sort of bring a bit more money into regions as well. That is the growth agenda is really important. Space is a really good access point for that.
Thank you.
I have a
Does
question.
anybody else?
I couldn't find my hand on my screen, so raise my hand. back when you were talking about the mass ejection hits,
Mhm.
your slide said that there's a huge risk to undersea cables, and I wondered um, how the undersea cables would be affected.
So that amount of energy going into going into the planet in the atmosphere. So those undersea cables, yeah, they're underwater, but it's going to be that amount of energy is going to push down into it, and it could be something that could impact them. We're not 100% sure on this, but that amount of power going into the planet, if it does transfer down to that level, it's
Mhm.
not something we predicted about. We often think about, well, could there be something that's going to cut an undersea cable, that provides the internet? Is that going to cause a problem for us? Well, yes, something like that can cut it. A vehicle can cut it. We don't tend to think about these impacts from space, and maybe it won't impact it, but what if it does, and what if it could? And there's no reason that perhaps it couldn't if it's powerful enough. So
Mhm.
it's just to do with the amount of energy that's going into it. It's not something we've tested it and subjected it to, but it could. And that's the problem.
Would it affect wind turbines in terms of the offshore wind development? There's cables under the sediment there.
I
To,
mean, potentially, yeah. Yeah. I will admit I'm not an expert on this one, so I wouldn't want to give a definitive answer. But certainly, yeah, for power generation, yeah, if it's transmitting, that power along, and you then go and supercharge it, yeah, potentially as well. And I think that's it. I mean, we saw the impact on the transformers along the western side of the United States. It melted them. Yeah, they became overloaded. So really got power going through it and you then dump more onto it that's not anticipated or predicted, which is why it's really important that we're monitoring this so that we have that ability to sort of assure and look after what's going on. That's really important. So yeah, I would say that there's a significant risk there. And again, perhaps not so much the physical infrastructure itself, so the wind turbines, all those things, fine, but when it fries it with the amount of power going through it underneath, yeah, that could be an issue. I think that some of those undersea cables were laid down quite a while ago as well, before we were thinking about this sort of stuff. So it's not really protected for it.
mhm. Thank you.
Holly?
My question is, have you ever been in space or do you want to go to space?
Oh, I've never been in space, unfortunately, but yeah, I'd go in a heartbeat. So I think it came out. European Space Agency, put down their application for astronauts, and said, "Do you want to go into space?" But I filled that out within, yeah, within a heartbeat. It's like, yep, that is getting filled out, done. I didn't get very far along the route, and I was lucky enough to meet one at you know, destination in Blackpool fairly recently, one of the successful applicants. You suddenly realise why I didn't get very far. It was not a comparison. This person had done something absolutely amazing. Doctorate. Gone to the Antarctic. Sometimes it's luck of the draw when it comes to the medical stuff as well. But space is difficult and it is hard, and there's a long number of things to get through. I've not been perturbed though. I'm really keen to sort of keep developing myself so that the next time that the European Space Agency, whoever, puts out a call for astronauts, yeah, I'm going to put my name down again. I think space is something aspirational, and certainly the ability to go work in space and that sort of desire for it is what got me to Space Command. In and of itself, it was an idea that I saw that on the jobs. It's like, I'm putting my name down for that. There's not a hesitation or not a moment of doubt there. It's very cool to be able to sort. And I
Yep,
think
I
it's something
wanted
that
to be,
happens. Sorry, say again.
I was going to say I wanted to be an astronaut since I was 6, but
Uh,
didn't happen. I don't like math.
Me neither. I keep having to really force myself to do it, but I think it's that wonderful piece, isn't it? Space is something that I think certainly I don't think I'll hear a disagreement on this call. It's something I think unifies us wonderfully, and you can kind of see it when you sort of say, "Yeah, I work at Space Command." People think you're making it up. Yeah, they don't believe it at all. It doesn't. It does. It sounds proper sci-fi, and I think what's quite exciting is we now live in these sci-fi times. This is something that we have to do.
Mhm.
Um, or we're so reliant on space as part of our day to day, we kind of forget about it. that we are all part of the space community, whether we like it or not. We routinely have access to space. But I know what you mean, Polly. I'd love to be heading out there. I think it'd be amazing.
Yep. Well, if they ever need a firefighter, medic, or a therapist in space, I need it.
Hey, I'll carry the bags. I don't care.
That too. Thank you.
Do we have any more questions?
Maybe we've answered them all.
Very thorough presentation.
Well, I hope people enjoy it. Similarly, if people want to ask about AI and quantum, I can do that quite happily as well. I was quite lucky to be able to do that. But whatever, I'm more than happy to talk about anything.
We have actually been having a bit of a discussion about AI and whether it's a good thing or not. So what's your view on AI?
It's quite so actually. Slightly shameless plug. I've got a chapter in a book coming out in the new year that's all about how AI can better support just war theory. And I think, from my perspective, it's all about intent behind it. I think AI is just a tool, just like anything else. When you sort of when you boil it down, it's not inherently good or bad. It's how you intend to use it. I think if you intend to use it, yeah, if you want to build a killer robot and you go, yeah, I'm going to build this killer robot and I want it to kill more effectively, bad, straight away. I think that's fundamentally a bad thing to do. If you say, I want to build this AI and I want to put it into a robot because I want it to target more effectively, I want it not to have collateral damage, and it's not going to pull the trigger unless it's entirely sure that what it's hitting is a valid target. I think that's a good thing. Yeah, it's what you're trying to get out of it. Are you trying to create more death and destruction? Bad. Are you trying to wage more peacefully? Yeah, while it sounds like a very big contradiction in terms, are you trying to limit the horrific nature of war and limit those atrocities? I think that's a good thing. Yeah, and if you say, well, I'm not going to invest in AI because I don't want to answer those questions, so I'll just do it as it is. Well, then you're not progressing. You're not making things better or worse. You're just leaving it as it is. Yeah, but I think we should always try to do it better.
Would you like to send us some information about your book so we can plug that for you?
Yep. Yeah, no, it's part of a collaboration. I did it with some other people as well. So it's not my book. It's just a chapter in a book as well. But
that's fine.
Yeah, no, I'm more than happy.
Send us the information and we'll give it a plug.
I will. I'll dig it out. But yeah, it's expected to be out in January.
Well, it seems like we've got all our questions answered. Thank you, Captain Kingsley, for moderating today. And thank you for coming and talking with us. It was a very interesting presentation, and I learned a lot. I just got a solar telescope, so I'm just starting to do imaging of the sun and learning about the prominences and everything. So it was very inspiring to me. If we ever here in Michigan ever get any sunshine again, to get out and take pictures. But if we don't have any more questions, I wanted to remind everyone that we do have another Sol Speaker event this year on December 5th, and that'll be our usual Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Fleet Captain Randy Mitson is going to be doing a talk on discovering the Algonquin Radio Observatory in Region 13. And we've got some good speakers lined up for the beginning of the year and are going to be working on filling our schedule out. You will notice that we will be either having a steady day and time for the next year's series, or we may move it around a bit depending on where our guest speaker is from. So we're trying to branch out and bring in more people from around the world and get different perspectives. And I just absolutely loved your talk today. So thank you so much for joining us here.
It was a real pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. Enjoyed it immensely.
Great.
Thank you.
All
Should
right.
point out he's had to miss his chapters RPG game tonight.
Oh, man.
It's the sacrifice. That's it. If my character's dead.
Dedication.
Well, everyone, have a wonderful weekend. Those from the US, have a happy Thanksgiving next week. And we'll see you next time.
Happy Thanksgiving to the US, and yeah, have a good one, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.